I think Yaron is going to present about 7525 bits.
Okay, thank you. So, hi everybody. It's 7 p.m. in my time zone, and so good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. It's using TLS in applications working group. So it's the last session of IETF 112, and I think we can start. So this is not well. I don't think it's changed since the last time. And this is Living IETF Code of Conduct. It is presented by request of ISG, so that working group chairs remind participants in the beginning of the session, so that we have a code of conduct, and it's good if you follow it. So, meeting details, useful links, and job notes, and so we need bullshits are collected automatically, and we need one job scribe. I don't think whether we need it because Miteko has a chat window and you can see it, but just in case, if anybody can translate messages from the Java or from the chat window, in case somebody doesn't have audio video connection, it will be great. And we need 2 note takers. So anybody volunteers?
Being a note taker is a great opportunity for newcomers in the IETF. You get to learn everybody's name.
So
Live, that was very convincing.
Yes, it's true.
I see on the chat, I think Francesca volunteered. She said,
I can see it.
All right.
Francesca?
This is Peter. Since I'm not speaking about 7525 bits, I can also take some notes too.
Okay.
It's easy now that we have HedgeDoc because everyone can just pitch in and help.
But still, we have to have some person who will take care of HedgeDoc. Okay. Thank you, Hannes.
Okay, we got Hannes, Peter. This is Rich. I'll also take notes when I'm not speaking.
Okay. I've already prepared HedgeDoc, so I think it's save you some work, some time. And so agenda for today, administrivia, and we have finished with it. And then we have 3 presentations, each devoted to the active working document. And I think the status update will be reported by presenters. And then open mic, 5 minutes, and closing. So any question for agenda? Go. Okay. Going once, going twice. So let's start with presentations.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for sharing the slides. I'm Rsa Pss and not Peter, unfortunately.
Okay.
And I'll be presenting the work on the new version of BCP 195 or RFC 7525-BIS. Next slide. So we have published 2 versions since the previous in-person meeting, and even though we do have a few open issues that I'll be discussing today, the draft is very much stabilizing. We managed to close most of the open issues. And so everybody on this meeting is encouraged to read the document seriously back to back, especially the section that describes differences from RFC 7525 and provide feedback. So specifically, we worked on ALPN, and request support for some application protocols that still do not have ALPN defined for them. We added text from the draft that deprecates MD5 and SHA-1. We went deeply into integrity and confidentiality limits, which are described for TLS 1.3 in RFC 8446, but for TLS 1.2, this actually required some new work, and I'd like to thank the authors of AEAD limits for their help. And we added a requirement for the extended master secret extension. So non-trivial work, but still in the big scheme of things, relatively minor changes to the draft. And there are a few remaining open issues, all of them actually around TLS 1.2. So even though the RFC will cover both 1.2 and 1.3, we're more conservative, more careful about adding requirements for 1.2. And so those are open issues. Next slide. RFC 8446 allows but does not require support of the supported versions extension. We're not sure about the benefit of this extension for TLS 1.2 servers, and we would appreciate feedback from the working group. If it does turn out that the benefit is minimal, we would rather not add it as a requirement, even though it is mentioned in 8446. Next slide. So somewhat related to the previous one, version downgrade protection, and specifically games with the server hello random field and magic values inside this field. This appears to be relevant for the main use case for ephemeral cipher suites, and therefore we should probably add it as a requirement to the BCP, but again, your feedback is appreciated. Next slide. RSA PSS. So PSS for message signatures is already a should in TLS 1.2. But what do we do about certificates? And especially, what do we do about certificates given that real-world certificates, at least on the open web, are simply not using PSS as far as we can see. So do we really add a requirement for support of PSS and support of the signature algorithm cert extension? Question here. Next slide. There's a draft in the TLS working group about obsoleting key exchanges. It's kind of stalled for the last few months, and we are waiting for it to mature. It is not adopted yet, although we believe the general sentiment is to adopt it into the working group. And we would like to be in sync with this draft, especially if it is adopted. And next slide. A question that came up, I believe, in IETF111 by Mr. Farrell, where he asked whether we are breaking consumer documents. So actually, there's progress since this slide. Thomas and I went through the 101 RFCs that cite RFC 7525. The vast majority of them do it in a very generic way. Either they just say, hey, here's a TLS BCP and it's a good idea, or they say it's a should or even a must to support it, but no specific details. There are some exceptions. I didn't see anything of note in the 50% of them that I went through. Thomas might want to disagree with me. He read the citations in the other 50, but assuming nothing, no surprise, there are like formally breaking changes, or in other words, if you're compliant with 7525, you may not be compliant with 7525 bis because we are adding requirements. But those apply to anybody who seeks to be compliant with a BCP and not to any particular consumers of the BCP. So this is the way we look at it right now. Again, feedback appreciated, and I believe this is my last slide.
This is Peter Yaron. Thanks for working on that with Thomas. I know I didn't get to it as quickly as you did. I think the only other point is if people have RFCs that, or other specs, because there's probably people outside the IETF who are citing this as well, that they are concerned about. At this point, I think we've done our due diligence to go through the consuming documents, but if people have concerns, they should raise those now or during the working group last call.
So I put myself on the queue. I'll just taking off my chair hat for a while. So Yaron, there was a discussion in SAG around sort of the work they're doing on deprecating or promoting or somehow signaling around crypto suites. And you made the comment that this work really should have been or could have been done in UTA. Is there any synchronization we should be doing there? Any comment on that?
If you're asking me, I said all I can.
Yes, I'm asking you.
This is more of a good question to our good ADs.
I guess I can restate the question to our ADs. Is this something the UTA should care about, or should we just ignore that work, or hope for the best, or talk to TLS working group, or what should we be doing?
Hi, you're talking about what was presented in SAG, if I understand correctly. I wasn't there, so I can't talk to that, I'm sorry, but I will check with Ben afterward and look at the recordings and notes. But I'll get back.
Oh, yeah, that'd be greatly appreciated. I mean, there is a sort of an apparent, Jaron called that out during SAG, and there is sort of an apparent conflict here. I mean, TLS is essentially doing sort of a work making recommendations on CryptoSwitch, which is kind of duplicates at least the intention of what the UTA was supposed to be doing. And others had also made comments. I think Hannes made a comment that, well, you know, there is often a tendency to focus on the web use case for TLS rather than sort of other application use cases for TLS, which kind of also gets mixed in with that discussion. But anyway, yeah, we'd be really appreciate any kind of guidance here.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that. I don't know if Ben wants to say anything now, but otherwise I will. Well, here you are, Ben.
I don't have anything terribly useful to say now, but I think that we as the ADs can take an action item to coordinate with the chairs of the various groups and get a real answer for this topic.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah, just to put my hand up quickly to say that last time around we we did cross-post when there was a working group last call, I believe, in the Utah working group. We cross-posted to probably TLS working group and SAG and other places so that folks were aware that this was the place to provide feedback on that document. But it sounds, I wasn't in the SAG session either, but it sounds like there was a bit of a broader topic that came up. But we should at least make folks aware of what's going on here. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to Jaron and Peter. So I think from what you presented, I think that the probably most challenging is the last issue. It's reviewing for 100 customer RFCs. So do you think it is feasible, and in what time?
Jaron and Thomas already did that.
Yeah, we already ran through this review, couple of hours, and we need to get together and make sure that there are no surprise findings. But barring that, we can close that issue as well, I believe, as the other issues. Again, we do need working group feedback on these issues, but I think we have a way forward. And so we are very near working group last call.
And one of the actions that we depend on is the adoption of a draft that deprecates, around TLS deprecate obsolete cats in TLS working group. Is it right? So we are waiting for the draft to be adopted.
We have not, I don't know that we have a position as an editorial team. My personal position is as long as it's not adopted, we don't have a dependency on it. So we can go into working group last call, whether it moves forward or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jaron, I think that was going to be an informational reference anyway, wasn't it? Or was it we were going to have a normative reference on that, the keck stock?
So, even if it's informational, but it does declare some things as deprecated, it's much better for us to be in sync.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think we can go to the next.
Yeah, just one more quick note on that. I guess, people are always deprecating things. And, 2 weeks after we publish the RFC that replaces 7525 BIS, someone could decide to replace something else, right? So these documents are sort of a snapshot in time at some level, the best current practice, and that's what the current is all about. So I would expect at some point we're going to have another update to this document at some point, 10 years from now or whatever, and we'll be deprecating other things. So we can't track everything that people are doing at all moments, but this is sort of a snapshot in time of what we see as the best things to do right now.
So,
Jonathan?
Yeah, I guess my question would be: is there anything useful you could say of pay attention to this, so for whatever this, to see what gets deprecated in the future, whether that's the IANA registry or TLS mailing? Is there an easy way to point somebody out to say, hey, this is where, when things get deprecated, this will be where you'll find out. So pay attention there.
So this goes back to the comment about coordination between the TLS and the UTA working groups. If TLS is publishing documents about deprecation, then this is where you will see new things being deprecated. Otherwise, we will need to find some other mechanism.
Joe, go ahead, please.
Okay, hi, Joe Shalloway, one of the co-chairs of TLS. Yeah, so I think the intention is to adopt that. We were trying to merge the content of two drafts, and we're waiting for some action from the author. So I'll take that action item to follow up at least on this RSA KX or the KX draft. There is, as to the broader coordination question, I think, yeah, we should definitely have a chat between the chairs and make sure that we're, kind of working with the two groups as best we can, because I don't think there should be, conflicts of interest here. I mean, obviously, we're all kind of working towards the same goal, and I think the things we're putting together to kind of signal recommended are, mechanisms that any group in the IETF can use to, put documents together to do that. But certainly, we absolutely want coordination.
So I agree. Let's try to coordinate our efforts. Thank you. And we can start the next presentation. So, Rich, please go ahead.
Okay. Next slide. All right. So last time I talked about planned changes. They were all done. Basically, the directory text X500 died, unloved, unmourned. Nobody's sad. Simplifying the text, remove an appendix related to simplifying the text. If this is a standard, then you should do this. We can remove those constructs. So next slide. So here were a couple items that were issues last time that we got consensus on. Wildcards are simplified, so you can only do star.example.com. You can't do web.star.example.com. You can't do starweb.example.com. Nobody on the list was opposed. The commentary is on the wrong slide. The removing pinning, yeah, that detailed section and having the, well, if you found a match and didn't find a match, look at the pinning. Victor had a couple of paragraphs of text that I think made a lot of sense, so those were merged in. My mistake, this had always intended to be a standards thing, and so it's still proposed standard, not BCP. There is more use of the, must, may, should not language. And then the final pass is a PR waiting to happen. Next page. Okay, so other changes. There were lots of editorial changes. One of my main goals was to reduce the list of terms used, just so it was easier for people to digest. More text about why common name is bad and evil and you should not use it. A lot of that came from Ryan Sleevey. And now, just read the whole darn thing. It's not that long. But the other big change that's happened since the last 10 years is TLS SNI is assumed to be used or assumed to be available. And so a lot of simplifying assumptions could be made. Next. So a couple things I'd like to discuss. Brian had submitted some text on multiple identifiers, as in what you do if the client isn't sure which identifier it's using, and if the certificate, the presented identifiers, have multiple things in them. There's some security implications from that. That was posted to the list. It hadn't gotten much comment. But I'd like the working group to look at that. I'll post a reminder, a week or two after the IETF when things have settled down and say, hey, please let me know if you disagree. There's also some editorial changes, minor wording things, nothing semantically changes with this PR that I've got. Hope for a better title. So maybe something like naming and verifying service names in TLS. I look at the hedge doc minutes, and the title there of that agenda item takes up the whole page. So we should obviously fix that. It doesn't have to be completely descriptive. There's enough context. People aren't going to say, oh, what should I name my baby? Let's look at this IETF RFC and see, oh, it's got naming in here. Peter's been obviously kind of busy with the RFC editor program, so he and I need to sync up, see if there's more from what he had wanted to do or was hoping to get done from 6125. Jeff has already said no. It might be ready for a working group last call in January, depending on how much the maybe list is. So that's it. That's the update.
May I comment on this slide? I strongly support the idea to change the title, because currently the title is way too long. It takes 3 lines, or 2 or 3 lines of text, and if you can do it with more condensed way, not losing the sense of the document, it will be great. And I strongly support this idea, because it's easy to reference the document with a short title. And
yeah, we'll come up with something shorter. I don't even remember how Jeff and I came up with such a long title, but we'll definitely have something much better.
Great. Thank you. So, anyone in the queue?
Hey, Rich, here again, I'm wondering, just like we did for 7525, I know there's dozens and dozens of documents that cite 6125. We might want to do the same thing that Yaron and Tomas just did. It's not that hard. Most things are just have sort of a perfunctory citation, but so I think that would be a good thing for us to do before working group last call. And the I think that the RFC editor stuff should sort of calm down here after I publish the next version. So I'll have some cycles to help with that.
Okay, yeah, great. We can divide it up offline, but yeah, yes, it's a commonly referred to doc, and we should make sure nobody's going to get too upset.
73, according to Yachty's stats, it looks like 73 RFCs cite 6125. So we can go through the things, and it's probably not going to be a horrible task.
Sounds good. I mean, like I said, I think the big change is SNI, and if anyone is not willing to accommodate SNI, that bug is on them, not on us.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
So, thank you. Some other comments? Okay. It seems that the queue is empty. So let's go for the next presentation. So Hannes, please go ahead.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, thanks for giving me time to talk about this document. Put a couple of slides together on the open issues, and maybe some of you can provide a little bit of a feedback on this. Next slide. So there are really 4 issues which I would like to talk about today. One is on an issue with CCM8 when DTLS 1.3 is in OS 48, and there's in appendix there's very clear analysis on what the security is that CCM8 provides, and so that's a little bit even to someone who is remotely familiar with cryptography, a little bit it raises the question of whether the security of CCM8 is actually a good thing going forward. So we had a lot of discussions on this in different groups. So I would like to summarize those and make a proposal on the way forward. The second item is about the initial timer values and the idea of relaxing those. We made some recommendations in the 1.2 version of the PCP. And DLS and DTLS 103, specifically DTLS 103, handles retransmissions differently than before. So that's something to look at again. There was also a longer discussion on the DLS mailing list about long connections that people use in the industrial IoT space. And so there are some problems associated with that. And that's the third item. And finally, there's the topic of what identifiers go into these entity certificates, and what recommendations or examples could we provide there, or provide better guidance what people use. Of course, you can find more on the GitHub issue page. Okay, let's start with the CCM8 topic. So maybe not surprising to you guys, but the integrity limits of CCM8 are quite low, obviously due to the reduced stack size. And if there's a very good document in CFRG that goes through the different algorithms and provides, obviously, with tunable parameters, sort of like, in some sense, some guidance for developers on how they could make a judgment of whether they want to take the risk of using CCM8 or of course, or other algorithms, and based on those assumptions. And what is also so, our conclusion, Thomas and mine, was after revisiting that literature and the referenced specifications, we kind of came to the conclusion that we have really difficulties recommending CCM8 to anyone these days. Unfortunately, it's the only mandatory to implement CipherSuit in co-op, and so there's some side effects of making any recommendations. It sounds kind of weird to make a recommendation not to use it when other IETF specifications do otherwise. And of course, we can't just change it and then people are upset, of course. Next slide. So we had some discussions on the lists, on different mailing lists, core mailing lists. We also discussed this in TLS and even multiple times. And there are different, the CFRG document. I don't remember the exact draft name, but there are different tunable parameters. So you can shuffle things around, like message lengths, or how many attempts you are going to give an attacker before he learns something, and so on and so on. But and that's essentially the approach that OSCOR takes, or at least appears to be taking with one of their recent drafts. And the approach is obviously one possibility to give the developer a possibility to make their own judgment on whether that's a reasonable choice in a specific environment. But there's also a downside, as you probably know, is like developers are often not really in a good position to make that type of risk assessment, because they may not necessarily always know all the parameters on the deployment environment, or like you deploy it initially here and then you deploy it there. So the environments may be very different. So as I mentioned on earlier, I'm inclined to say, hey, let's not recommend this, which of course then leaves the question about what would we recommend otherwise, which is something on the next slide. So that was our approach. I see Dero suggesting having other sort of approaches, and that was the Ricard mentions the OSCOR document that was just referring to, and maybe this is a place where UTA can provide recommendations, or at least consolidate the discussion so that we have a kind of a uniform approach to this. But this is just my take on the story from also reading the mailing list. So if we pick something else, if we say CCM8 has this bandwidth reduction improvement because the tag is shorter, but it's maybe not worth it given the security aspects. One could, of course, use CCM instead, because that's already implemented in the devices. The downside of that is that CCM as well as CCM8 is in, if you look at sort of like the common IoT cloud-based services, is not something that is frequently offered. So in general, like there's obviously, if you switch from CCM8 to something that is more widely supported, then GCM would be a better choice. But of course, GCM wouldn't be available in hardware on those IoT devices, because for many years we have told them to implement CCM. And of course, there's a cipher suite available for that as well. And also the using GCM with SHA-256 has different impact on like code size, RAM usage, etc. As I wrote here, but it's not a big drama, I would say. Of course, 660 bytes is not nothing if it's in software, which in this case, for many devices, it would be. Maybe there are other approaches. Some people mentioned Poly 1305, the Cha-Cha Poly algorithm, but that may be a possibility if it's implemented in software. Another approach would be to wait a little bit because there's the NIST lightweight crypto competition ongoing, and maybe there's something that falls out of that is more constraint friendly. But in general, I have to say, like, it's not so easy to say like what would be a suitable alternative here. And at this point, I would welcome feedback from the folks in the group, what you think should be best done, whether this whole idea of moving on from CCM8 is a bad idea and we should just reinterpret the analysis, which of course we can do by picking different, setting the parameters to different values, or what else? Maybe there are totally different ideas as well.
A few comments as participant, not as the chair. So, and probably John, I think John Madsen is a queue, and probably he will have a better, provides a better comment. But today I've reread his message to Zephyr G, with analysis of CCM8. And the bottom line, as I got it, is that, well, CCM8 has a limitation, but it is not a disaster. It is not a disaster if you limit the number of messages that are sent. And if we're talking about IoT, we are not talking about gigabits and tens of gigabytes links. It's usually a relatively small number of messages that are sent. So that is probably not so bad. But, well, I think John will comment better on it. So, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, Hannes, that I promised Hannes to comment more on this in CFRG, and I have not done that. I'm sorry for that. But as I said in SAG, I think the analysis done for TLS, DTLS, and quick turns out very wrong for CCM8. What the process does is that it calculates integrity advantage for a single key. I think that does not have much value for when you are in the security protocols, when you have multiple keys and you're doing frequent rekeying. So I think basically rekeying CCM8 as the DTLS suggests every 2 to the power of 8 doesn't improve security at all. So I don't think there's any denial of service attacks. I think the important security measure in CCM8 is the 64-bit tag length. I think that is very much okay for IoT radio. I have basically never seen any practical attack on 64 or hardly on 32-bit max either. So I think the only, and for a 64-bit Mac, CCM8 is very good, as you can see from the equations in the CFRG draft. So I think there will not be any better Mac with 64 bits from the NIST. You might get something more lightweight with 128 bits. So I think I will comment more on CFRG in the coming weeks when I get some time.
Yeah, I hear an echo, I think. Yeah, we obviously went through the, Ira posted the link to the document and the references to further material. And we went through those and also discussed it internally with cryptographers we have. There's nothing wrong in the analysis. It's just a question of like how about the setting of the parameters and whether you consider this the result that you get out of it, whether you consider that a problem, or whether you consider potentially frequent rekeying, specifically if you don't want to give an attacker an advantage by having him probe you and try things out. And then the question is like, how many of the packets do you then accept, or at what point in time of failed decryptions do you then rekey? And that's sort of the question. Of course, in some of the IoT networking technologies, the bandwidth is indeed very limited. So that's there, and maybe those they have their own link layer security mechanism. Like I'm thinking about LoRaWAN, but others. That's where it gets tricky. Is like in some other technologies. Let's say a device that is connected using Wi-Fi. Let's say a Wi-Fi camera. And or something like this. What are they? What is that device going to do? Like developers need to then make the judgment, and are these developers able to make a proper judgment, or do they don't care? I don't know. It's really tricky.
So, John, will you answer?
You
can hear you. Oh, okay, you can hear. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if I have. I don't think you need to do any very frequent rekeying. So I don't think any denial of service is a problem at all. You do need to do a rekeying for all of these protocols, but I don't think you need to do any more frequent rekeying for CCM8 than you need for CCM default or for GCM. I think that conclusion in the CFR draft is wrong.
Well,
all the calculations
I don't
in
think that's true. On that aspect, my understanding is that in order to not provide the attacker an advantage, you need to, after a number of attempts, failed attempts to send packets, sort of fabricated packets, you need to rekey. That's the or terminate the connection, and that would be a problem, right?
That's a problem with all the algorithms.
But the limits are different. That's the huge difference.
I think that conclusion is wrong. I don't think you need to rekey CCM8 more frequent than the full CCM. I think that's a wrong conclusion in the DTLS TLS analysis. I think the reason why they didn't is that they didn't really care about CCM8.
Okay, that would be worthwhile to explore a little bit further. Because that was not our impression.
We can bring this to CFRG, and John, can you please send the comments on this and to CFRG and probably CC to UTA so that we have.
I will do that.
Okay, thank you. So Jero.
Okay. I'll move on to the next. Is that?
No, there is a Tero in the queue. Just a moment.
Yeah, Tero.
So my comment is that if I talk about Wi-Fi, I don't think that's an IoT device. I think anything that is having more than 1 megabit of second link is not an IoT device. I mean, on Wi-Fi, saving 8 bytes from the CCM is not pointless. I mean, if we only think about the CCM8 on very slow links when you don't have enough bandwidth to use the full size of the tag, or you don't want to waste their battery time and so on. And in that case, I would actually think it would be better to say that, okay, CCM8 is okay on IoT devices which are using smaller than certain bandwidth link. And it doesn't matter how fast the attacker can send the packets. If they are all still going to the 1 megabit or 100 kilobits per second link, it can only send certain amount of tries per second. 15.4, for example, have 100 byte maximum, 127 byte maximum packet length, and there is 2 to the 32 packets maximum for each, session, and it takes about a year to send those. So, rekeying once per month, and it limits very much how much of tries you can do. So that's why I was thinking about having the bandwidth limit and saying that it is for IoT, and IoT is defined having something that is bandwidth less than this.
Okay, taking a bandwidth limit, yeah, we could definitely look into that, because the message size and the number of messages is obviously a factor in the equation. So yeah, that's we'll take that into consideration.
So can we go further?
Yep. Next slide. Yeah. So the initial timer value. So in the previous RFC, we had a very high initial timer value for the DTLS 1.2 handshake, simply because of the retransmission mechanism, which worked on the whole flight. So if you had some radio technology where, for whatever reason, because of the high latency or because of some congestion, you had difficulties getting a flight through in time, then that was obviously a big obstacle, because then you would retransmit the whole thing, and then you make the whole situation worse. So that's why there was this high initial timer value selected. And also not just over the wire transmission, but also the operations that take place on the device. So 9 seconds sounds pretty high, like when you hear it, But if you take also into consideration that some of the devices are actually also constrained devices that talk to each other, so there's seconds add up, slow communication and so on. We also had the use of at that time when we worked on this, the use of DTLS over SMS, and for some of the network deployments which had very limited cell coverage. So obviously there you had a lot of latency as well, and that made total sense at that time. Okay, next slide. And then in DTLS 1.3, we changed the retransmission mechanism from a flight-based to a record-based mechanism, and we added this ACK message. And that is obviously gives more possibilities than what we had available in the 1.2 version. And so we thought that it would be time to reduce or relax that initial timer value down to something like obviously multiple options. We thought maybe something like 3 seconds, like it's suggested in RC 298080, or even going further down, like some of the other RFCs do. Maybe a middle ground would be good, but definitely having something lower would be beneficial for implementations to actually have a reasonable performance, because first of all, many of the networks changed. In the meanwhile, deployments changed, and also the capabilities of 1.3 is different. And I don't know if there's any objection to this, whether someone has some deployments that really require a very high initial timer value. But if not, then I think we should go ahead and relax it. Okay, I don't hear anything on this issue.
You can bring this to the list, but I think
yeah, I'm planning to post all the issues again to the list. Okay. They're also in the GitHub page, but it's probably good to sort of confirm some of the things. Okay, next slide. So this was a longer discussion that was triggered by Steffen Fries, who works for Siemens, who has been using IoT in sort of like in this Industry 4.0 context, and apparently they use DLS connections with a very long lifetime, and that creates some problems because like he was talking about certificates expiring, and like how do you do re-authentication and all these sort of questions. And here's the link also included in case you want to read this up. And so we had a discussion with Steffen after the debate, and we thought that it would be a good idea to capture some of his concerns or some of the challenges he has, none of which require really protocol changes, luckily. But I think it's just something that is good for developers to know, like what are some of the differences in a DTLS 1.3 deployment that compared to a 1.2 deployment, when you actually use these connections that last for a very long time. And specifically now, as with the CID, that's even easier to have these long-standing connections. So I think that's something we wanted to add. And if someone of you has a deployment with similar characteristics, I think that would be extremely valuable input. I know, like, the IoT segment is very fragmented. People work in all sorts of different environments, and so it's sometimes difficult to get sort of the input from all these different environments, whether you're working on a sort of more industrial setup or a more home IoT deployment or whatsoever. Okay. John?
Yeah, I think it might be good to mention that you get a bit lower security. I haven't read what you write in the document, but TLS 1.3 for long connections give forward secrecy, but that only protects you in one direction. TLS 1.2 with frequent renegotiation protects you in both directions. So if an attacker steals a key, they are limited in the data both forward and backward. But that's I don't know. Most IoT you cannot. It's more a consideration than any technical change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely good to make those type of remarks, yeah, and capture those aspects. Will do, John. Okay, next slide. What else do I have? Exactly. So we relaxed the requirement on the use of the EUI 64 for the entity client certificates, and because just different deployments use very different identifiers for devices, so it's very difficult to mandate one specific identifier, and that's already in the document. When we made that change, we got feedback from some who suggested that we actually provide some specific examples of other identifiers, and the ones that were mentioned to us were from the GSMA for cellular deployments, of course, and then also in the case of lightweight M2M, it has a couple of different identifiers specified, and to give some guidance, because that's often a point that confuses, or people like to discuss about identities of IoT devices. I like to prefer to talk about identifiers, makes it less dramatic, but and then there are also different types of identifiers at different stages, whether we're talking about things that happen during manufacturing, or whether we're talking about the identifiers that are then used sort of like the operational certificates, as some people used to call them. And I think even in the IETF, there's some, for some of the IoT related protocols, there's some diversity of what gets populated for these client, these identifiers for client certificates. If you look at things like Anima Prisky or those type of devices where you need to have certain, like they're not opaque identifiers, they have a structure because they're used for a specific purpose, then for routing messages to the home in quotes. So we plan to add identifiers there, and like if you have any preference on what examples to provide, that would obviously be helpful, because there's a long list of them, and we don't want to be sort of exhaustive there by any means. But I think it's also a recognition that any sort of efforts to agree on one specific identifier is kind of a little bit a losing ground, at least from what I can see.
Sorry, you have only 1 minute left.
Oh, okay.
For presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Do I have one more slide?
No.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah. So if there's any feedback.
Well, my question, I have a question regarding the last slide. So, is there any connection between the work that Rich is doing with 6125-Bs, which is also about naming, connecting between certificates, naming and certificates, and with TLS and this work?
Yeah, I see his the relationship in the sense that he's talking about the server side, if I understood that correctly, and I think that's quite important to also I think referencing that work, and we should definitely do that, and the client side. I don't think we can make the same recommendations on the client side as we do on the server side, because they're just different requirements, and not just only like the way how the authorization works for what you get from the server, to match it up, for example, match the SNI with what you get from the server certificate. The authorization is very different on an IoT in an IoT deployment from the client side to the server or to multiple servers if you have something like Anima. So there's some difference, and it's probably in the end, like if you see it from a high level, of course there's a little bit of annoyance on the server side because you now need to look at different places for the identifiers rather than in one specific. But on the other hand, like for most deployments, it doesn't matter that much. There's no sort of like interoperability problem. I think the interoperability issue of matching an identifier against something else, that occurs in fewer places like Anima or maybe some other protocols that work similarly.
Okay, thank you. I think that the reference 6125 is a good idea anyway. And we are running out of time. Our time is over. And I think we've just are able to finish our agenda just in time. And thank you very much for everybody who attended. And hope to see you in person next time, if it is possible. And so have a nice rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.